Hello. It's been a while since I've done a Fountain of uh, Comfort stream. Speaking of which, um, Jordan Peterson um, was recently on Joe Rogan because they have launched um, Peterson University, and which isn't officially really a university right now. It's the first course they're releasing is John Vervaeke. They put out a trailer today, and while Peterson was on Rogan, he said something I thought was really interesting. And it's been a long time since I've done a Fountain of Comfort stream, so I figured um, let's let's get back on track. So this is what he said.
Because the classic therapist produced view of mental health is that mental health is sort of inside you. It's in your psyche, it's in your mind, but it's not. Like your mental health is the harmony of your existence in relationship to the future and other people.
Your mental health is the harmony of your existence in relation to you and other people, basically. Um, uh, the chat can be funny. If somebody wants to jump on, please feel free to jump on. But so I think, I mean, part of what has me very interested in um, what our society seems to not be able to deal with is what is healthy. And even in terms of physical health, right? Um, I don't have to tell you, well, maybe I do have to tell you. UCLA Medical School, recently there was an expose. Um, in their first year classes, they were teaching the medical school students that being overweight doesn't necessarily mean being unhealthy. And I think, like, we have to realize what's going on here. Um, there's something um, there are people who will say there's no such thing as mental health problem, right? They simply they don't believe in things like depression, certainly in anxiety, but even things like schizophrenia. um Hello, Jason, you're new here. Moshe Feldenkrais, I don't know who this person is, defined health as being able to move from one place or position to another with comfort. More deep, the more I think about that. um well, I mean, in one sense, I think by health, people mean functioning, being able to function, right? Um, and um, I mean, I was also listening to Pajot with Peter Boghossian, right? And as far-reaching as that discussion was, I really thought it was for the first time that somebody seemed to be um, ap- actually talking about um, like the basic fundamental issues of how we view the world. And we've gotten to a place where when we talk about what is healthy, right? Who is healthy, right? Um, we have difficulty expressing that. And I think Pajot, although it took a very long time, was talking about um, the functioning of human beings in a what he called a god, but a something that is bigger than individual human beings. Um, and function was a big part of that. The whole discussion. It was a very long discussion. But I mean, Fountain of Comfort is supposed to be a public resource for mental health. That's the tagline: public resource for mental health. And I think Peterson really, really broke it down when he said, there's this clinical model that mental health is inside your head, and it's not. It's the harmony of you in relation with, well, what was the exact word? I wrote it down. Mental health is the harmony of your existence in relationship to the future and other people. Mental health is the harmony of your existence in relationship to the future and other people. I think there's something profound about that definition. It really works. And I think, I have that book about beauty over there. Like harmony, beauty, I think these are words we use to describe health, to describe goods that are more fundamental and complex than we can easily identify. There's a sense of, I know healthy when I see it. But the fact is, when you have such different views and ways of looking at things, like what is a mentally healthy person, right? Is a healthy person somebody who never gets angry? Is that mentally healthy? Someone who never feels passionate emotions, is that healthy? Yeah, I don't know if I'm just rambling. Anybody want to jump on and actually talk about this? Ryan, you should jump on. Ryan is going to be jumping on in 1 minute. And Ryan is a counseling student. So this will actually be a Fountain of Comfort discussion. Believe it or not. While we wait, this is a book. It's a book of poetry by our very own Nolan Watson. And it is available now at an Amazon website near you. It's a reflection on Dante's Divine Comedy, which I have not read, and I have very little interest in. But since Nolan is an old school member of this little corner, or whatever you want to call it, I decided to buy me a copy. So there's Ryan. You need to turn off the YouTube video. It would be on a different what you call it. Hello, Andrew.
How's it going, Jacob?
Good. Is your sound working?
Took me a second.
Aha. Your sound seems to be working.
Cool.
So what do you want to say, Mr. Counseling Student?
No, I like the conversation. I like the question because it, like, I don't know. Health to me is like, we talk about it as if it's its own end, but I'm like, what are we actually, like, what is it moving towards? Like, what are we, like, it feels like it's kind of begging the question when we talk about, like, oh, we need mental health. It's like, but why? What even is that? Why are we even aiming at that? What are we aiming for? Is kind of my question. You know what I mean?
So there's a professor on Twitter that I contacted because his whole thing is the study of where is it? So he nosology, it's called, right? And nosology is here. The branch of medical science dealing with the classification of diseases, right? So he's a nosologist. He's a psychiatrist. His name is J.D. Haltigan, PhD. He teaches at the University of Miami, I think, or at least he got his PhD there. Okay. And so I asked him for, so here, I'll read my DMs to him. I know this sounds like an obtuse question, but how do you define mental health or disease? Feel free to point me at any text you think does a good job. I don't expect a treatise. I've been looking for a short definition without much success. And he pointed me at the DSM. I'm like, yeah, I know about the DSM, but I get people who tell me there's no such thing as mental health, like, and I just want to be able to define disease. And I'm like, and I said, I know it sounds insane, and maybe it is, but people are constantly.
Well, the DSM doesn't even, like, as far as I'm aware, the DSM is just basically a description of symptoms and how they manifest. It's not saying, like, why do we consider these things symptoms of a problem?
Right. Yeah. Actually, the interesting thing, where's my DSM-5? The interesting thing is, frankly, I think the F codes, is it? Or is it the Z codes at the back?
Yeah.
Which talk about, no, the F codes are the addictions. The Z codes are disorder, condition, or problems. Mm-hmm. Those are the ones that are just, actually like problems, right?
but they're just listed with no explanation. There's just like, here's a thing, that's it.
Yes, but at least there's a problem there, and you can say, look, here's a Z code, like here's a code. This is the problem I'm trying to solve, right? Mm-hmm. Like here, Z91.410, personal history of spouse or partner violence, physical, right? That's an actual problem.
Right.
As opposed to depression. Like, you can you can diagnose anybody with anxiety and depression.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I like. I mean, I know you're not talking about depression in particular, but I like the example because it's like, man, Vervaeke had a good series like 2 years ago, maybe, where he was talking with some other cognitive scientists, and they had a good video on like depression. Like it was a whole series on depression, but like there was one that stuck out to me because it was like they were basically thinking of it in terms of like depression is when it's like you're driving along the road and you realize you're not going where you thought you were. And so you pull off to the side so that you can like pull up your phone and look at your map and get reoriented and like figure out where you're going. And I like that, like as an analogy, that's super helpful for me because it's like, okay, depression itself is not a problem. It's an adaptive response to a problem. What
Right.
is the problem? The problem is you're not going where you thought you were going, which implies you have an aim, you have a direction, you have movement, and lack of movement isn't necessarily a problem. It might be a good thing in that moment if it helps you reorient towards where you ought to be going. But then the question is, where ought you be going?
Right. So, I mean, from an evolutionary psychology point of view, the question becomes, why do we have depression? Why does depression exist? And I think the only real answer you can give is depression is what is your body inhibiting you from going full speed in the wrong direction.
Right. And that's a much better understanding of what's going on than just, depression's bad, okay? Like that's kind of like the attitude we have. It's like, that's not helpful, I don't think.
Secretary of the Board of Directors of Fountain of Comfort, Trey Braswell, would like to say something. You need to. Yeah.
I thought I was just gonna type it in the chat, but I was asking, have you watched Sapolsky's lectures on evobiology?
Who's Sapolsky?
Robert Sapolsky, the famous biologist at evobiology at Stanford. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about things first of all from the 70s.
Wait. What do you mean from the 70s? His work is from the 70s. The lectures are from the 70s. What do you mean?
I thought the lectures are from the 70s. Yes, I may be wrong. Let me check. Sapolsky.
He's talking about transgender people. He doesn't use the term transsexual, so I don't think that could be from the 70s, right?
His lectures on human behavior and biology, 2010. So yeah, not nearly as old as I thought it was.
Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, I listened to some of the stuff he was saying. It just seemed incredibly. I didn't listen to the entire thing. Like this lecture collection that I'm looking at on Stanford's website is 25 videos, almost all of them over an hour, some of them close to 2 hours long.
Yeah.
He didn't seem to be saying anything new or incredibly incisive.
But like Trey, what was the insight, or like what do you remember from it that like stuck out to you?
Well, I think that he at least brought to my attention that usually with EvoPsych, we have to basically find a use for each of these qualities. But what he basically said is, what if instead I think what he mentioned with depression is that we need to have sort of negative emotions, especially with pain. And then basically those negative emotions have sort of created a negative output that was not intended. So he basically says that depression is a mutation, not something that is innately beneficial. I may be describing it wrong, but basically what he says is that like we can have behaviors, and then if we think about super behaviors, those can just be mutations. For example, OCD does not have to have a benefit, but we can imagine that parts of OCD or like beginnings of OCD may have a benefit.
Right. So
Does that make sense?
I mean, one of the one I remember him mentioning is it's possible that schizotypal behavior might
Yes.
be useful, but if it goes way off, right, it becomes schizophrenia. And
Yeah.
that's, I mean, that's kind of, again, I don't think he's saying anything incredibly insightful. Like, yeah, if you're like being strong is good, but if your muscles are like so strong as that they're inhibiting your bone growth as a teenager, obviously that's bad, right? So too much of a good thing is bad is not saying anything.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I think to I don't know if this is Trey's point or not, but like I think a lot of what we call maladaptive really is adaptive in the right context until it just like goes like it's adaptive to the point of like it should cause change that's beneficial, and if it did that, then great, it served its purpose. Oh, wow.
You are on
That means I'm right. That means I'm
Apple.
correct.
Yeah,
That means
you
it
are.
agrees
You
with me.
are on an Apple machine. We can.
Yeah,
tell.
no, I got a MacBook recently.
Yeah, that's that. Uh, being so yuppie is.
I'm
Yeah.
yuppie. I also make like cold brews every morning, you know. So. But yeah, I mean, it's like what starts off as adaptive is fine. It's good. It's for a purpose. But then it just if it doesn't serve its purpose and then move on, then it becomes maladaptive. I think like if we understood things through that lens, I think a lot of stuff would make more sense. Like depression isn't bad per se. It's serving a purpose. But if its purpose is not accomplished and then it just remains and grows and becomes a way of being, then it's bad. Right?
And ultimately, I mean, you have to recognize when you're talking from a larger societal view. I mean, like there 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 are times when suicidal behavior is good for society, not the individual, right? Like
I wouldn't be saying that on YouTube, man, but okay. Like I don't disagree necessarily, but
I don't know
damn.
how you can say that there aren't times when like it would be
But
beneficial to society to have like certain people off themselves. And I
but
mean, if nothing else, let's talk about euthanasia, right?
yes.
That's but that I mean, morally, we have moral qualms with that because of Judeo-Christian morals, which I think we should have qualms. I am completely against euthanasia, and I don't believe in that pragmatic type of thing. But look, I mean, when it comes down to it, there's a reason why our young men are willing to kill and die in service of an ideology that like that's how wars have been fought for thousands of years, right? And if people actually only cared about their self-preservation, like you would never be able to have soldiers.
No, but I feel that when you start, that's the point I was trying to push back, is that like for Evo Psych to work, we need to have an explanation of everything. But I think what Robert Sapolsky says is like, no way, hold up, there could be just mutations, and why can't suicide just be a mutation that went wrong?
Right. You should not be stupid in your in your application of evolutionary principles. Like
Right.
it, yeah, that's not a. I mean, I don't see how that's something worth saying.
Well, I
Well,
also
it is worth saying if like it's good pushback against this idea that like everything is adaptive, because I think what Trey's saying is like some things might not be adaptive, some things might just be because of whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's obviously wrong to say everything is adaptive, because that's basically saying everything is good. And it's like, no, like obviously there are things that are bad.
Yeah.
So then how do you differentiate between what is purposeful and what is purposeless?
I think ultimately that has to be defined theologically. And that's part of why I think why I think psychology needs to bend the knee to theology. That's not something. What do you want to say, Trey?
But that's just such a nothing term. I just like I think that there needs to be some pushback, because I don't like you're gonna go on this description, but what's theology? What part of theology? Isn't psychology its own sort of theology? It seems to be working
No,
pretty good.
psychology is not theology. That's something I am very adamant about, and I want to stop psychologists from thinking they're theologians.
But you like, okay, is wokeism a heresy of Protestantism?
Yeah, wokeism is
Okay,
a
then
theology.
psychology is theology. That's
No.
also what I want to push back. You can't have these terms and then
No.
sort of have this plug and play
No,
with it.
being woke is not psychology. It's a religion. It has nothing to do with psychology. It's just a religion.
You don't see the move on the chessboard that you just made?
No.
So you've made a social movement, right? Which does not declare itself to be theology, and then you've then said, no, it is doing theological positions. But then you say psychology is not doing those theological positions. And that's just
Hold
only
on.
one more point.
Again, hold on. I am saying how things should be, and yes, I am categorizing things and saying there's psychology, there's religion. This falls, and I don't care if people think or don't think they are doing something religious. If they're doing
Right.
something religious, despite the fact they don't think they are, they may still be doing that. That's actually part of what's wrong with psychology nowadays. Is like people seem to think that whatever I self-identify as is the truth, and it's like, no. Just because you don't think something is true doesn't mean it's not real.
Yeah, I just don't like. I don't know how much the importance of pushing back on this, but I don't know how you couldn't say psychology is not theology if you're expanding it out into other areas.
Because you shouldn't. Like
I think what Jacob's saying is like when psychology is done wrong or done poorly, it borrows from the domain of theology without realizing that it's doing so. But if it was kept in its proper place, then it would stay in its own lane. And it would submit to the fact that it cannot speak to things that are above it.
I am going to mute Trey because why can I not? Okay, I couldn't even mute him. So
yeah, but I mean, like, I think I see the problem in my own little counseling sphere where it's like, yeah, we can talk about like what's going to help someone get over XYZ, but it always seems like it comes down to like, but to what end? Like, especially when you have conflicting problems and conflicting values, it's like you've got to pick what values you're going to align with, and like how are you doing that? That's not really a health question per se.
So one thing that Paul Vanderklay said that really stuck with me is he said, I never send couples to a marital therapist unless I want them to get a divorce.
Gosh. Yeah.
And because the way we do therapy is individual happiness.
Yeah.
And like staying together with your husband or wife for the kids is not something that like is conducive to
Yeah, okay, so
short-term individual
and
happiness.
this is why I've found systems theory to be so helpful in like the way I organize stuff, because it's like, okay, let's say man, woman, kids, like husband, wife, kids, like that whole group is a system. The husband and wife are a system, and then let's say the man himself is a system. Each of those systems has conflicting desires and conflicting like ultimate values, right? And so if the man is coming in for individual therapy, when I think this is your point, like dealing with his anxiety, quote unquote, might mean, hey, like leave your family, like that'll fix your anxiety. Okay, yet true, yes. Is that health? Health for who?
Yeah.
Like not health for the family.
Yeah.
And probably not for him ultimately in the long run. And one of my kind of suppositions is like those are in the long run gonna be the same thing.
Did you hear the Peterson quote I played?
Yeah, I didn't watch the interview, but yeah.
Okay, like I really think he hit the nail on the head. Mental health is the harmony of your existence in relationship to the future and other people, right? And like generally, especially in individual counseling, and we were talking before, and I was talking about how I think group counseling is so important,
Mm-hmm.
right? I've become completely convinced that vast majority of people who are having individual counseling needs to also be in group, and like that group as maintenance works a lot better than individual counseling as maintenance, right? Like I think, and frankly, this kind of gets into the whole estuary thing,
Yeah.
right? Just sitting around and talking to people, just sitting around and talking to people. I think we used to, as human beings, we used to do that a lot more before we had these infernal devices. Sometimes you would just sit on a porch and talk to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like maintenance for your mental health.
Yeah.
And this idea of group, like versus individual, I mean, we've become so focused on the individual, we don't.
But that's like way before psychology became mainstream, right? I mean, like that's just an American culture thing in general, right?
It is
Because like the problem you're talking about, it's the same. Like, man, 5 or 6 years ago, I met a friend who was like here from India, and he was telling me like he's like shocked. He's like, you people don't like talk to each other. Like it's weird. Like you drive home, you open your garage, you drive into your garage, you close your garage, and then you stay in that little box. And that was bizarre to him because he's like, where I'm from, like people like you get home, you're like milling around, going to each other's houses, wandering the neighborhood, like that's just normal. Like you're constantly engaging with people.
I've told this story a million times, but when I came to the United States, I went and visited at my aunt's house, and my cousin went and grabbed something from the freezer to zap and eat.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, aren't you going to wait for dinner? He's like, oh, everybody just grabs their own dinner. Like we don't sit down to eat dinner. And this was the most shocking thing to me. Like, how do you have individual meals? Like, why isn't there why isn't somebody cooking for everyone and everyone sitting down and eating together, right? Like,
because that's patriarchal. It's evil. It requires someone to be responsible for that, and we don't want to do it.
I mean, so yes, on television, that's just not anything anybody does anymore or is supposed to do. Everybody's supposed to sit in front of the television and eat. You, God forbid, you should sit around the table. Like, even have a dining. I don't have a dining room table. What would I do with a dining room table? Right? Like, and I think, I don't think that's as old as we somehow imagine that it was. I don't think this. I don't think 100 years ago the vast majority of people were eating alone
Right.
in the United States.
Yeah, I mean it's just one of many little cultural things that have emerged from us being so individualistic, right? And I don't know what drives that.
I honestly, I have to blame. I do blame it on a desire to deconstruct patriarchy, etc. Like, yeah, having a,
Would you root it in Protestantism in general?
maybe.
Like a slow roll of the kind of core ideas of Protestantism.
I honestly, I have to say, as long as you're translating, you're translating Paul saying there's no Jew or Greek, man or woman, slave or free in Christ Jesus, the way most Protestants nowadays do, you will inevitably end up with this.
The lack of any shared identity, you mean?
Yeah. Gar says I would blame secular culture before rather than Protestant culture, but secularism is an extension of Protestant culture. What we mean by secularism is an extension of Protestant culture. It's the flattening of all hierarchies, that every human being is equal to all other human beings. There's no specialized functionality. And I mean,
so this is a really morbid thought maybe, but like I've had this idea for a while that like these kinds of problems are self-correcting in the long run, right? Because like the people that are going to survive are going to be the ones that have healthy communities, right?
correct.
Everyone else is just going to die alone and not have kids, and their ideologies will just go away in a generation or two.
Right. So I'm going to veer into the political briefly. So I was talking to somebody and I mentioned that I made a prediction. I like to make solid predictions because I want to know if my thing of the world actually meets the world, like empirically, like test my model.
Right.
And one of my predictions, which I made back on in February on Twitter as a prediction, was Joe Biden is not going to be the nominee come November. And why did I get into this?
I don't know. I'm waiting.
And so I said it's an optimistic prediction, right? When I made the prediction, I said this is an optimistic prediction. And the question, like, I was just asking myself is, why did I label that optimistic? And it was optimistic because I was hoping that the people who were engineering things were engineering things how they turned out to be, which is, oh, like they didn't have a primary, because they knew they were going to replace Biden in a different way, and they just figured out, like, they were competent enough to be able to get rid of Biden, right, and not have a primary, right? And that, for me, is optimism, because I would prefer if the people who are doing all the stupid things were actually competent, but I don't think they are. I think it's obvious that there's no way. Like, if I thought the woke could actually make their utopia happen, I wouldn't be as opposed to it as I am, like, believing that they're just incompetent.
So what I'm hearing, and I might be hearing you wrong, but I mean that's like a kind of pragmatism, right? It's like if they can do it, then I don't care so much about the means that they use to get there.
So the way I've been terming it is, we all suffer, but at least let's not suffer stupidly, right? Like, if you're, like, I may disagree with what you're trying to do, but I wouldn't be as opposed to it if you were actually able to do what you say you're, like.
But like if the
reality.
aim is bad, then isn't it better that it can't be accomplished? Like that's what I'm stuck on.
That's a good question, and ultimately I have to say I don't think so.
Okay.
Right? I don't think an incompetent enemy is better than a competent enemy, because I think an incompetent enemy will actually destroy things, whereas a competent enemy, first of all, can actually, even the capacity to recognize when you're not gonna win, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Okay, so the incompetence can cause kinds of damage that are aside from just trying to reach the goal.
right.
Like there's all kinds of corollary stuff that can happen.
Yeah, if you're playing a game of chicken with somebody who doesn't know that you're not gonna let go, right? It's like, yeah, you're just gonna end up crashing into each other.
Okay, so that sounds to me like even though you think the aims of woke are wrong, you still see it as, we're doing opponent processing with them.
I wish. I don't think we're even doing that, because I think they're not, like, I'm fine with opponent processing. If there was somebody on the other side who was intelligently moving towards a different goal, right? We could have opponent processing. The problem I think we have now is and why I brought it up in response to your morbid thing of, like, oh, like, the people who don't get this, they'll be gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've said this, like, I was talking to somebody who was very exercised over the whole trans thing, and I said to him, hey, you know what? If you have 6 kids and 36 grandkids, and everybody else who is into the trans kids, like, sterilizes their own children, by the time you die, it won't be a problem. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, yeah. And that is one way of looking at it. But ultimately, I think our society, like, if all of that is going to waste as opposed to, like, actual opponent processing, right? Like, Peterson emphasizes the importance of each human being, right? Mm-hmm. Each human being can contribute, right? And, like, I think
Okay, so like even though reality will long term correct itself, because of course it will, even still, you're like, there's a lot of needless suffering that could be resolved if people would repent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what bothers me the most.
Yeah.
It's the stupid suffering.
I'm curious. I mean, this is maybe a hard shift, but like you as a counselor, I'm curious how this influences your perspective in your work.
Um,
Because like I know how it influences mine, but I'm curious to hear your take on it.
one thing I have become convinced of, even though I don't much like it, is unconditional positive regard is necessary in a therapeutic relationship. A therapeutic relationship cannot be the same as a life coach or a pastoral relationship. Pastoral counseling is fundamentally different from psychotherapy. And I think I at least have to wear different hats when I am engaging in one or the other. And part of my whole thing with Fountain of Comfort has been recognizing, okay, this is one or the other, right? So when I am actually counseling someone, like in terms of mental health therapy, right, psychotherapy, that has to be a space where I don't own their problems, right? So I give this example. I one of my internships was at a domestic violence shelter, and I was talking to this woman who the situation was so obviously disgustingly horrific.
Mm-hmm.
Like, her husband was the most worst piece of, that you, all of the worst things you can imagine. This guy, the most predatory, like, she was incredibly young when he found her and got her pregnant, right? Like pedophilia type stuff, right? And I'm sitting there in the room with her, right? And she's like doing this whole thing of like, but he was nice to me, and it's like, you can't, it would be absolutely counterproductive, wrong, in every way false for me to be like, wake up, he's a monster, right?
Well, and it wouldn't work.
It wouldn't work. And in addition to everything else, it would not work, right? Yeah. But like, that's a very different thing, and that's why I think psychology, like, it needs to be a separate thing, right? From, we live in a community, we see this relationship between this young girl and this monster, and like, not saying I necessarily approve of this, but in most places, her brothers would go beat him up,
Right. Yeah.
that type of thing. It's like, yeah, no, this is something that, like, there are situations where, in terms of like society, right, it's not necessarily the psychotherapeutic route that's going to lead you where it should,
Right.
right? Like, and that's why I did a video on mandatory reporting. I'm a big fan of mandated reporting, right? Because, you know, as a therapist, sometimes when you're talking to, like, I've never done child therapy, but even in child therapy, right? It doesn't matter if the child understands or wants to, you know, report abuse. You report the abuse anyway, because that child's just not in a place where they can. Well, at Trevor, I was actually with, like, and that was one of the things that pissed me off, was they weren't reporting doing the mandated reporting. But like, psychotherapy is something different from just like living your life and trying to fix the situation, and like, and this is where social work kind of gets weird, right? Because as social workers, not all social workers are doing clinical work, right? Some social work, in fact, probably I would say most that goes by the name social work is just, it's not actually therapy.
Right. So I agree with you, but I'm curious to hear you flesh it out. Like, what precisely is different about being a counselor versus being a good friend who's trying to help?
A counselor is working on, I would compare it to the difference between a podiatrist and a general practitioner, or let's say a dentist and a medical doctor, right? If as a dentist, like, if you have an infection somewhere else in your body, right, and it's not in your mouth, like, it's not what I'm here for. That's not what I'm trained on. That's not what I'm trying to do, right? This is actually a really important point. A lot of people do think of therapy as paid friendship, and frankly, that's the type of therapy that's easiest and most financially rewarding and least actually rewarding. So, like, every therapist I've talked to has said pretty much the exact same thing. You have two choices. You can make almost no money working with people with serious mental health problems who really need your help, and it's incredibly hard and poorly paid. Or you can make a lot of money, assuming you're competent enough. You can make a lot of money helping people with first world problems, and basically just being that friend that they talk to. And that's part of what I'm trying to undo with Fountain of Comfort, in my most aspirational ideas. And every patient gives you a 25% chance of going insane yourself. What a decision. So one of the best professors I ever had, he said, which I absolutely loved, he said, how do you know if someone is insane? Because they drive you crazy when you talk to them. Like, and there is a part of that. Like, sanity is outsourced. Our sanity is not incorporated completely in our own heads.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I want to play what Peterson said again.
Because the classic therapist-produced view of mental health is that mental health is sort of inside you. You know, it's in your psyche, it's in your mind, but it's not. Like, your mental health is the harmony of your existence in relationship to the future and other people.
And so, like, when you're doing therapy, you're helping that person, like, deal with their psyche, right? But sometimes, like, the problem isn't in the mouth, right? And if you're a dentist, like, you still have to say, like, this person is choking, and it's not because of their teeth, you know, or like, and
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think, again, this goes back to, like, I find the systems view to be very helpful, because it's that kind of fractal view of things where it's like, okay, you've got parts that cohere into a whole, and then you're a part of a family that coheres into a whole, and you know, you can keep going up to communities and churches and nations and world, and like all of those together somehow matter, you know, and it's like, I just don't think we have a good view of that. But it feels so foreign to me that I look at it from the outside and I'm like, it feels compelling, but I don't really get it, because I've grown up as an individualistic American, you know.
I mean, yes and no. Like, despite the stories we tell ourselves, nobody's actually that individual. Like, everybody has the story of their individual self, like, as an individual. And I certainly had that story, like, especially when I went off to college. Like, I'm like, I'm independent.
Right.
And, like, it was so not true, despite the story that I told myself.
Right.
And
well, and I think I'm interested in that incongruence, like the incongruence between, like, yeah, we can't exist as individuals in reality, you know, like Kamala's thing, right? You think you just fell off a coconut tree? Like, there is something to that. Like, it's goofy as heck the way she says it, but like, I get the point, and I agree with the point for the most part.
yeah.
But like, when there's a strong incongruence between that reality and like our self concept, which is, I am this island god floating in a sea of other island gods. It's like, I don't know.
So it reminds me of the two poems. There's Invictus, I am the master of my own fate. You know that poem?
Mm-hmm.
And For Whom the Bell Tolls. And ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Because no man is an island, and, you know, like, there is an ambivalence there, and I think there has to be an ambivalence there, because we are individuals somewhat, but we're not atomistic individuals. And maybe, I mean, I keep on thinking of Ian McGilchrist talking about chopping things up in, like, too small of bits, as opposed to seeing the larger whole. And maybe it does come from being too left-brained. That's how our society has kind of gone off. But, like, also, when I realized, so I don't know if you have any of your friends who share a Facebook account, you know, husband and wife.
Oh yeah.
You know, at first I found that weird and like silly, and then I was like, why don't they have this functionality? Like, it makes perfect sense. Why wouldn't a husband and wife share a Facebook account?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, why don't we have family Facebook accounts? and especially like with libraries and like buying music, like this always gets me. Like I could be owning a large amount of music, and then like it's I can't share it with anybody, right? And I looked into the legalities. Like when you die, all of your music reverts back to the company, right? Or your ebooks, right? And it was like, hold up here. Like, why is the internet forcing us to be so much more individual than we actually are?
I mean, what comes to mind is I've thought a lot about this because like I grew up, I was around 5 or 6, and we got internet access, and I started spending all my time in front of the computer alone, and it's like I whatever, can't blame my parents. Like nobody knew how much impact this whole thing was going to have. Like it is what it is, but like I can look back and reflect on like, man, like all of a sudden my world went from this to like many orders of magnitude bigger overnight. And because I was a really curious kid, but my curiosity as before the internet was contained within my little world. The little bugs I could find outside, and the questions I could ask the adults around me. Suddenly, boom, you go from that to like I can ask any question about anything. I'm on Catholic forums, I'm on Jewish forums as like an 8-year-old asking big theological questions and getting conflicting answers, and it's like, okay, I can't handle this. My little brain can't make sense of all this. And I think for my generation especially, like that had a big impact. I can't prove it, but I think that's a big part of why millennials are the way they are. I think we're just a big soup of unintegrated crap, and we're trying our best, but it's not going great.
Well, what gives me hope is like, and I've started paying a lot more attention to the difference between um, the difference between like before the printing press and after the printing press,
Mm-hmm.
right? I've actually started a lot more actually thinking about how life was so different before the printing press than after the printing press.
Yeah.
We adapted. It was an incredibly tumultuous time,
Yeah.
but and I'm sure. I mean, I know there were lots of problems with it, but I don't think anybody would want to go back to before the printing press.
Right.
And I think the internet is kind of similar. Um, Elijah says, "Why didn't encyclopedias cause this problem?" I'm not sure what makes you think encyclopedias would cause this problem.
Well, because I was framing it as just a large influx of information.
But, I mean, I read the entire encyclopedia set as a kid. It wasn't that much information. Like, I had a World Book encyclopedia set, and, like, I read it. Like,
Well, and it was designed to be integrated, right? It was like it wasn't the same as like little 8-year-old Ryan getting on a Catholic forum as a Protestant and suddenly being able to like warp into a totally different. Okay, so Jacob, are you familiar with the notion of small world networks?
no.
Okay, I think you might be interested in like some network theory stuff, but like basically the idea is like, and this is just kind of this is like an organic thing that emerges in nature, whether it's human communities or just like natural stuff. But like you'll get little groups of things that like has a maximum capacity, and then you've got a bunch of other ones, right? And then you'll have I forget the term for it, but like kind of a higher level of the same thing. Like it naturally grows into a hierarchy of that. And so this higher level is like kind of the same amount, but that's got some connections to the lower stuff, and you just keep going up like that. That's a healthy, stable network. It's a healthy, stable, small world network, right? And the higher things have more information because they're interacting with the lower levels, right? But like that higher integrated information is contained at that level, but it's not going to spread directly from this to this, right? It has to go through those higher levels.
Yeah.
That emerges in nature naturally. That's just the best way for information to stabilize and for systems to stabilize. I think with stuff like the internet, what happened is you took that stable network and overnight changed its configuration, like very dramatically. And now it's like you took this stable network and you made it into, I mean, it's basically a big bang for the world global ecosystem. And now we're going to restabilize into another small world network because that's what happens. I actually, like, people talk about like echo chambers. I don't think that's actually bad. I think it's actually a good thing that we're restabilizing into this small world structure again. And in the long run, it'll lead to stability, happiness, peace. Like people will find their little communities, and then things will kind of go back to how they used to be.
But I think what most people mean by echo chambers is when you have two large networks of networks and they start conflicting and they don't have a peaceful interface between them.
Well, and I think that's why things like TLC are emerging. Like you have people that are interested in both that form communities that also still have their connections to these communities. So basically it's like higher levels of this hierarchy are just naturally emerging. And what's going to happen is people like in our communities are going to be able to like I can go to my Protestant friends who just like my normie Protestant friends who were overwhelmed by the world, and I can help them make sense of things a little bit better in a way that calms them down, right? And you can do that for your communities, and like, and that's just like that's a naturally. I use the word emergent because I don't know of a better word, but like that just happens. Like that is the system lending itself towards long-term health. And I think it'll be fine in the long run. It's just we're in the early stages of this, and so probably for the next few hundred years it's going to be a mess, you know.
Well, the Jewish calendar ends in 175 years, so
Okay.
yeah, but the Messiah has to come by then. So
fascinating. Okay.
Yeah. This is one of my things with like I'm like I just wish Christians were more messianic. Like, yeah, I know it'll be fine, but like I'm hoping it'll be in my lifetime.
Yeah.
But so Elijah asks, Casual Carter said, information in a mode that is designed to be addictive and the information may or may not be correct versus one author with cited sources. The encyclopedia set was written not by a million teenagers. And so I was one of the early editors on Wikipedia. I was really excited about Wikipedia. I was in law school. And so some of the like most basic legal articles, I went back and I'm like, I created those, right? Like I wrote the first stub for some of the basic legal things, right? And I stopped editing Wikipedia when I recognized there were people who were hired to make sure that a page said the things that it said, right? It was specifically a thing about Sri Lanka, and I got into an edit war with someone, and I realized, oh no, this person like has a job to make sure that this page says what it says, and like there's no way I'm going to be able to defeat this. And that's when I stopped doing Wikipedia. But like, yeah, Wikipedia started as a million teenagers, and then it turned into a million teenagers plus a bunch of very motivated ideologues plus a bunch of people who are paying for someone to monitor their page and keep certain information off of it.
Right. Well, yeah, and so like that's a function of an I don't know how to put it. A network that's too connected. Because, you know, with my little small world network thing that I'm talking about, like what's going to emerge is communities developing their own local Wikipedias that will be biased toward, I mean, necessarily towards their own perspective, but like that's inevitable and it's stabilizing. As long as they are also submitting to higher levels of hierarchy that have a bigger view of things, right? So as long as there are people in those little kind of communities that are respected as leaders who are also looking over here, then things will be good. It's just we're not there yet. I think we are getting closer, but we're not there yet.
We'll see. So I don't know, Cassandra, if you watched Malcolm and Simone's latest video, but I was sitting there like laughing because they were like making very specific predictions about how the world was going to be like in many years, and it was like just the fact that you think you might know, like if you think what the world's population is going to look like in 80 years, I have news for you. 80 years ago, we hadn't invented the pill yet. Like, things like technology, and so their video was about what they believe is a population collapse, which might happen. I'm not saying it definitely won't, but they were also talking about the population collapse and its effect on real estate and how people will be interacting with each other based on that. And it was like, whoa. Like, start with like the technology in how human beings will relate to each other, and like all the details that they were getting into. Like,
Yeah.
it was like,
And the economics of how we build houses, and I mean all of it.
and all of it. Like, for all we know, in 80 years, everybody might be living on ships. Right. I mean, there's a ton of water out there, and being able to live on, especially if nuclear power goes the way many people think it will, which is we'll have a battery pack the size of this cup, and it'll provide all the energy you need, right, forever. Like, with enough energy, you can live on a boat forever. But like,
It's reminded me, I've never seen it, but Waterworld.
I have not seen it, but okay. Like, look, all desalination requires is energy, and there's plenty of living beings to eat,
right?
And there's plenty of water, and like on a
so your point being,
a nuclear submarine can stay underwater indefinitely.
Like, we don't know the future, basically.
Yeah. We don't know the future. Like, I'm just talking about like a few things, and it goes back to who was Ehrlichman, the guy who made the really stupid bet, right? You don't know about the Ehrlichman bet? Here, Ehrlichman. Paul Ehrlich. Am I thinking of the right guy? No, this might not be the right guy. The guy who made the bet about world famine bet. Um, do people know what I'm talking about? Like the famous bet that was made with somebody who said that like the a third of the world's population. Yeah, it was Paul Ehrlich. Okay, so Paul Ehrlich. Um, oh, maybe I'm looking at the wrong Paul Ehrlich. Because this doesn't look like it's. Yeah, there's several Paul Ehrlichs. Yeah. Oh, right. Paul R. Ehrlich. So this guy. So, yeah, he wrote in 1968. He wrote the population bomb, and in which they famously stated that in the 1970s, hundreds of millions of people will starve to death in spite of any crash programs embarked upon now. And they started talking about population control and da 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 da, which is actually part of the like, and his like, he was just so incredibly wrong, and he still claims that he was right. And he's still like, people still pretend he's like an intelligent human being. Yeah,
well, couldn't he have the right pattern, just the wrong timeline?
Basically, here, this is the wager. The economist Julian Simon argued. Oh, did I pull this up? Yeah, I did. Okay. That argued in 1980 that overpopulation is not a problem as such, and that humanity will adapt to changing conditions. Simon argued that eventually human creativity will improve living standards, and that most resources were replaceable. Simon stated that over hundreds of years, the prices of virtually all commodities have decreased significantly and persistently. Ehrlich termed Simon the proponent of a space-age cargo cult of economists convinced that human creativity and ingenuity would create substitutes for scarce resources, and reasserted the idea that population growth was outstripping the Earth's supplies of food, fresh water, and minerals. This exchange resulted in the Simon Ehrlich wager, a bet about the trends of prices for resources during a 10-year period that was made with Simon in 1980. Ehrlich was allowed to choose 10 commodities that he predicted would become scarce and thus increase in price. Ehrlich chose mostly metals and lost the bet, as the average price decreased by about 30% in the next 10 years. Simon and Ehrlich could not agree about the terms of a second bet. Yeah. Like, it would be nice if scientists actually like had to be empirical.
Well, it's also, I mean, there's so many factors there. It's like, like if you chose metals, like we don't know, like even if the population declined or whatever, but like our technology for harvesting stuff got increased. Like, how do those things relate to each other? Like, who knows?
Yeah, and like people invent things, like human beings invent things. So yeah, but we've gone way off the topic.
Yeah, I was about to bring up Atlas Shrugged and the free energy machine or whatever John Galt made, but it doesn't.
Is that what he made? It's been 30 years since I read Atlas Shrugged. 25 years? Yeah.
But yeah, health.
So how do you view it as a up and coming counselor? How long do you have to go until you graduate?
I'll graduate in May, so I've only just started my clinicals a couple months ago, so I've been doing
Okay.
it for about 2.5 months. So I'm very fresh.
And then you have to do 3,000 hours?
Yeah, so graduate in May and then 3,000 hours. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, my plan is to graduate. I could graduate in May if I didn't do this thing. Like, I found it very difficult to do my internships and classes at the same time.
Mhm.
And so I'm finishing up all of my classes and then taking my internships after. And so I'll be done in August.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah. I was supposed to be done in December, but I ended up yeah.
No, in retrospect, I might have done it different because there were a few months where I was just exhausted because I'm doing all this and I still work my 40-hour software job. And I think you're doing that too.
Yeah, well, I was, but I ended up not being able to do my insurance stuff as much, so I've really cut back down on the
Gotcha.
insurance stuff.
Yeah.
And frankly, like, I not doing this type of stuff, like not doing my channel stuff, which is the fun stuff, was kind of like emotionally wearing on me, and it was like, I'm gonna go back to doing my more of my channel stuff like I have been. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, health. I mean, are you asking like what I think health is?
yeah. I'll put it to you the same way I put it to my cousin who's a psychiatrist. At what point do you tell your client they don't have to, like, not only should they stop seeing you, but they also should not go see any other psychotherapists?
Yeah, I mean, I've never tried to articulate this, so this will be rough. But like, I think I see it a lot in terms of optimal grip. So it's like, because like I said earlier, like I don't think health is its own end. I think it's like a means to the end of being able to move in the world in ways that are effective and satisfying, something like that. And not just as an individual, but in this kind of fractal sense of like I'm an individual in a family, in a community, in bigger communities, in a city, in a globe, whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, like to the extent that someone is unable to get a grip on the world and they've tried other things that haven't helped, then yeah, great, go see a therapist. Once you have a grip and don't feel like, or I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm still thinking about the discharge thing. Because right now I think I'm just doing it as like just by gut, you know.
So my idea for Fountain of Comfort is it should in some ways reflect what we do with physical health. Of you go to the gym, everybody goes to the gym, right? And everybody's supposed to keep up their nutrition, right? And then if you need next level service, right, then you go to a doctor. And then if you need next level service, you go to right. So I think there's, and this is my idea with support groups. Like, I think everybody should be in some sort of group where they sit around and they talk, right? Maybe led by some sort of peer, right? Which, in essence, you could call it a Bible study,
Yeah, Big Eva's got this covered, Jacob. Come join my non-denominational church. You can be a part of a family group. You can be a part of a life group.
Yeah, but they
it's pretty
wouldn't.
sexy.
They wouldn't let me in any of their groups. I've gone to mega churches, and
No,
they
we don't have any membership criteria. We have
none whatsoever.
no.
Wow.
I mean, you wouldn't be baptized, but you wouldn't want to be baptized.
Correct.
So we're good.
Like, and I think then if that's like, I think that can identify, okay, this is somebody who needs therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, and I mean, I tried looking up numbers. It seems like if 6 months of, and some people need intensive psychotherapy. Like, I've become a lot more of a fan of intensive outpatient programs, but like it seems to me that interventions should be 6-month terms. Like this idea of like, oh, in 5 years we'll figure out like, but part of that includes like actually sharing like clinical notes with each other, which I have never experienced people actually really doing that seriously.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I did a lot of therapy. Like nobody actually shares clinical notes with each other.
You mean like between different practices and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And frankly, it seems to me like one difference between social workers and other mental health people is they make home visits. Like, and it's like, yeah, well, why wouldn't your psychiatrist actually come and see how you're living?
Yeah.
Like, that seems like a really important first step.
How does the, I don't know, the economics of that sound dubious to me? Like, how do you have time for that and also make money?
It's not, I mean, look, first of all, I think we need to get rid of this 1 hour psychiatric thing. Like, I think an initial intake should be a 3-hour session. And if it is a 3-hour session, like a 3-hour session where I come do a home visit, or like that, and frankly, like ultimately,
But who's gonna pay for, like, if I can do 2 intakes in a day, who's gonna pay half of my daily wages?
Well, I mean, that's what social workers are basically doing when you call DCFS. A social worker goes out to a person's house. When there's an adult check, a social worker has to go out to somebody's house. When there's like the homeless outreach, like some social workers are actually going out of their offices to do mental health.
Right. And so what I'm like, if we're gonna scale this model up and make it more common, like who's paying for all that? It's not economically.
I think
viable.
Ultimately mental health, and that's why I called it Fountain of Comfort. One of the reasons is no individual, well, nowadays we do, but it used to be that you didn't dig your own well. There was a village well, right? Mm-hmm. And like there was water there, and when people needed water, they would come to it and get water, right? And I think there needs to be a more public health model. And what I would like to see is a Fountain of Comfort community where people who were helped feel like they should contribute. And like ultimately it's you hire X number of people whose job it is to maintain the mental health of the community, right? And they go wherever they need to, as opposed to this, what seems really bad idea of the person who needs mental health care is the person who pays for it. Like, that makes no sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
The people who need the most mental health care are not the people who can pay for it. It's the people who can't pay for it who are the most debilitated by their mental health.
Yeah.
But this whole thing started by asking you, and you didn't end up actually saying like how you're, yeah.
Yeah, no,
dividing
I mean, I did optimal grip. I don't know
optimal.
if I can be more specific than that. I mean, I do think, I guess I see things also in terms of agency. And so it's like, I think I'm dealing more with, I don't know, like what I'm dealing with is probably different than what you're dealing with in your social working world. I'm very much more of the first world problems kind of
Mm.
clientele, you know? And so from that perspective, what I'm thinking of is like, yeah, people have like these people have the resources. They just don't have the sense of agency over their problems. Um, and I think that sense of agency comes from, well, it's this kind of catch 22. It's like it's available. It just like isn't thought to be available by the individual. And so a lot of it is kind of reframing like and understanding like, okay, your anxiety is, it's not just a disease and you're broken and screw you, you have the wrong chemicals in your head. Like your anxiety is your system's attempt to adapt to something. And by understanding what that is and how that's working and seeing it for yourself, you will have an experience that gets you a sense of agency over that, and then it will change. Um, and so, health from that perspective is like the ability or the agency and the perception of agency, something like that.
So it's their individual perception.
Which, I mean, within the context of, so again, you take that model. I see it fractally. So it's like it's this. You scale that up. You can apply that to the family also, to the community also, to the nation. You know, right now our nation does not perceive that it has agency to solve its internal problems, and the internal parts are in conflict with each other. I mean, you could literally take the IFS principles and apply it to the United States, or to a church, or to a family. Like it's all the same stuff. I'm just what I'm most interested right now is the level of the individual, but I don't see that as being in conflict with all the other levels because I see it as one pattern that scales up and down. If that makes sense.
So in addiction studies, they talk about the identified patient. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah.
Um, I just found that to be so true. Like the idea that an individual is the problem is like, yeah, if you're living in a working functional system, that individual is not going to be as bad off, at least as the problems that you see in the worst places.
Yeah. Yeah, and so like like, did you watch my talk with Karen where we used that illustration of like the two markers with the rubber band?
Yes.
That I think that's a good illustration for how I kind of see everything. You've got this dynamical system where both parts are kind of individually moving, trying to achieve their purposes, but also there's this center. And to the extent that you're off of the center, that's going to be stress on the system. And you take that thing and make that a fractal thing, and like that's a system. That's a Bayesian inference system. And like, yeah, so like in a family, like if one, let's say one adolescent comes to me for counseling, I'm aware that they are part of larger dynamical systems, but I'm not really getting much interaction with all the outside stuff. All I have is who's right in front of me. And so it's like I recognize that, they are trying to achieve their own ends, and their parents are, and their siblings are, and there's all kinds of dysfunction there, but also like that interacts with what's going on in their own individual system and vice versa. And it's like, I mean, it's in some ways it's absurdly complex to the point where I'm like, how do you accomplish anything?
Well,
But regardless, one person is in front of me. They've come to me for help, and I do what I can.
one thing I've noticed is people who go through a lot of therapy end up oftentimes completely cutting off their family.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you have no capacity to actually help the other people in the family, the only useful thing you can suggest is cutting yourself off from those people,
Right.
which is incredibly destructive.
It will solve the immediate problem in some cases, but it won't lead to what I consider health.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have a lot of thoughts, but it's bleeding into like I wish I could give examples, but I'm not going to. Yeah, I don't know. That's a very real dynamic, and I think. I mean, in some ways, I think I view my role as helping people develop the ability to see from different perspectives so that they can have a better ability to integrate well into their various systems. Something like that.
So, one additional problem, which I think social work, as opposed to other sorts of mental health, actually addresses, is the people who need therapy the most are the people who are least likely to seek it out.
Mm-hmm.
And with substance abuse and social work, especially, people end up being mandated into therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And there is an aspect in which mandated therapy does not work anyway as good or easily as voluntary therapy, but I wouldn't say it's completely worthless, at least some of the time. Like, if the person is really resistant, it can definitely be. But yeah, one thing that I have noticed is sometimes you get the healthiest person in the well, Cassandra's been coming on to the Bible studies, so you are the same Cassandra, right? The um, you often get the healthiest person in that family structure who's willing to go to therapy. Whereas like what you would want is the what they were trying to do with JPP wasn't therapy, it was education. By the way, every time you hear psychoeducation, do you think just pontificating?
Yeah, because we don't really know anything.
Well, I mean, what? So, in my class discussions, like they say, which intervention would you use, right?
Mm-hmm.
And someone said, I mean, sorry, I'm reading and thing. Whenever the solution, like the intervention they want to use is actually just telling someone what to do, they call it psychoeducation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Like,
okay. I haven't seen it used that way, but that's
okay, maybe, and what
that's
in my
a euphemism for directive
yeah,
stuff.
basically.
Okay.
Yeah. Like,
Interesting.
yeah, psychoeducation is how. Mark says, Chad brought up this morning that his recovery through AA began through court-ordered group therapy with a sponsor. So in his case, it worked. Yeah, I mean, it sometimes works, but I'll tell you from my discussions with Chad, he definitely has a lot of and rightful criticisms of mandated therapy. Part of the problem of mandated therapy is it has turned into a business, and you have to be really careful about the people who are in the business of earning money through, like, the most predatory of people. Like, if you want to be a real predator, like, become a therapist. Like, you get the most vulnerable people, and if you're a predatory, horrible human being, you can manipulate them really, really. Like, if you're sadistic as a therapist, oh my God, like, you can do so much damage.
Yeah, I originally got interested in the field because I stumbled across like hypnotherapy and realized, like, whoa, like the fact that that's possible is really interesting. The fact that real change can be affected like that is like, okay, there's something there. But then the more I looked into it, it's like, dude, I mean, you really can have a lot of effect over people. And yeah, I don't know.
It also depends on the person. I mean, especially some people are incredibly malleable, and yeah, the number of therapists who sexually abuse their clients is not small.
Yeah, I was kind of naively shocked. Like, one of my early assignments in my ethics class, they had us like go to our state licensing website and look through like the past year of complaints to the board or whatever, and some huge percentage of them were sexual misconduct.
So when I was looking for internships, I did I did an interview, and after the interview, I went and looked up the person who interviewed me, and they had just gotten off a suspension uh, for having pled guilty to spousal abuse. It's like, not going to take this position. Thank you. Bye.
What do you think the average health of health workers is? Mental health workers.
There is definitely a selection bias. People go into psychology and psychotherapy because, and I know the numbers are north of 80%, because they have had personal experience with mental health problems. How much of that, like, optimally, you would want people who have actually successfully, like, been able to deal with their mental health. But, like, I know, especially in substance abuse, there's this push towards a requirement that you be a recovering addict, because they don't want people who, like, there's a certain type of thing of, like, you won't get it, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
But what I see most is because there's a sort of groupthink that gets disrupted by somebody who, not having been an addict, because I have to say, substance abuse, like, I was shocked to find out how much people with substance abuse problems have in common with each other. Like, there's a reason why the Big Book works so well for so many alcoholics, despite the fact that some of the interventions, like, I think a few chapters in the Big Book, if you're the type of person who has, especially, like, if you're a little OCD or social anxiety, like, I think it will drive you insane, right? This idea of, like, sitting down and writing every way you've wronged anybody.
Oh yeah.
Imagine somebody with OCD, like, trying to do something like that. It's so, but, like, somebody with that type of a guilt complex would never ever end up becoming an alcoholic.
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting? Like, Adult Children of Alcoholics, if you're familiar, it's like a different 12-step organization. They started with the same 12 steps, but then changed some of them for that exact reason. Because, yeah, like, it is super interesting. Like, you get some very shared characteristics among alcoholics. You get some very shared characteristics among spouses, among children. Like, it's very, there's something standard happening there.
Yeah.
Like,
not
you know,
least of which is the physical effects of whatever you are abusing.
right. But I think it goes beyond that, because, like, I used to be, I was involved in ACA, the Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I don't come from an alcoholic home, but I stumbled across their literature and was just so captivated by it. I was like, I don't know why, but I really resonate with this. And so I showed up for a few months just to try to figure out, like, what is going on here, you know? And I never quite got to the root of that, but it was just interesting to see, like, okay, there's people here from pretty different backgrounds, but when they read these lists of characteristics that are oddly specific, we're all like, yes, that is me to a T. like more so than like a goofy personality test. It's like there's something that really is like deep in the psyche, you know. And so I'm interested in that, although I don't really have great answers.
So the reason I brought that up is, um, you really see in the mental health profession there are certain, like,
Yeah,
yeah,
certain dysfunctional types of people.
yeah, that are very common. And the fact that it's over 80% female, I think has really skewed the profession in some ways that are not very healthy.
Well, and it didn't used to be like that. I mean, it was a boys' club originally. Like, why did it change?
Good question. I think part of it is actually because we started um, we started really encouraging women to have high-powered careers, and you will notice that women chose the high-powered careers which deal with interests in people rather than things, right? So you you're telling women, oh, you have to be a some sort of science or medical or health type thing, and they, as opposed to choosing engineering or like material or chemistry or whatever,
Mhm.
um, they will choose overwhelmingly things that deal with human beings. So that's why women become um, women become doctors more than they become engineers, right? And so I think that I think that's definitely a huge part of it. And then to some extent, we started trying to quantify and economically. So one of the places I did my internship was this convent where there are zero nuns left. It started as a convent that also had a shelter. There are no nuns there, and so they've hired people to replace the nuns, right? And so we have professional women who are doing work that used to be considered charitable work or social work, right? um, and that's how social work became a profession, right? It used to be that social work was just, oh, this is what wealthy women do after their kids are grown, is they involve themselves in charitable, like the church ladies, right?
Mhm.
And we've kind of turned that into the profession of being a social worker, right? um, I think those are parts of it that's my guesses.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting to, I mean, because I'm an engineer, um, and to be switching into this field and immersing myself in this way of thinking and just peers, it is mostly female, and um, yeah, I can just feel it in the air. Like I think differently than the average therapist, and I don't know how much of that is gender, or how much of it is just, I don't know, how people approach the field with their kind of cultural expectations or whatever. But it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, and frankly, I mean, I guess just as long as there's some level of parity. um,
Yeah, I mean it's like 25%, 75%, right?
It is, but at the same time, when you're looking at like the actual like, especially in social work, when you're looking at like the people who are doing, like the men tends to end up, from what I've seen, working in very particular, like I think men end up in forensics more and in locked units more than women do, right? In institutions like prisons more,
Yeah.
and so it's even crazier when you're talking about other like domestic violence shelters. Very few men.
Right. Well, I think I've run out of things to say.
And we've been going for almost 2 hours. I should probably end this. I think I'm going to end this stream.